Coercion is a very important topic in JavaScript, and like I mentioned previously in the introduction of this course, working with data is extremely important. That's what we do as developers, and an understanding of coercion is crucial to working with data. So let's just go to the basics. What is coercion? Well, it's just changing one data type to another data type. And there are only two types of coercion. The first type is explicit. And we're going to get into details later, but just so I don't leave you hanging, here's an example of an explicit coercion. Remember how we've typed the number function and we pass in a value and it converts it to a number? That is us telling the interpreter to explicitly convert that value into a number. That's just one example. The other type of coercion is implicit. And this just happens automatically by the interpreter. And again, we're going to be seeing examples, but just so you're not left hanging, here are a few examples of what happens automatically by the interpreter. 10 divided by a string, value equals null. And when we do an if statement, we normally have a condition, and that condition is converted to a Boolean. Okay, the number one rule you need to understand is that there are only 3 types of coercion. It's not that difficult, right? Just 3 types of coercion. You can coerce to a string, to a number, or to a Boolean. And that's it. Let's look at examples of each. First, strings. Well, let's just start at the basics of combining strings and numbers. And the way we normally do this is with the plus operator. And we've already seen how operators work. And whenever you use the plus or the minus operator, the data types must be the same. And if they're not the same, coercion will happen. Let's have a quick look at an example. Here's a few examples on strings. Let's first deal with implicit coercion when it comes to strings. So let's console log. Let's say 50. And now we know 50 is a string. Let's say we wanted to perform a math operation, minus 10. You can see the output is 40. So what JavaScript has done in the background is it has automatically coerced that string into a number. How cool is that? We can do another example. Console log, what about 20 divided by 2? It's automatically coerced it to 10. What about explicit coercion when it comes to strings? Well, what's cool is we know we've got the number function in JavaScript. We've also got the string function. So we can go console log. We can write the string function and we can pass it a string. 1, 2, 3. How cool is that? We can do the same. Let's copy this. Let's paste this and do true. But what's interesting, and I guess you can't see it on here, okay, if I go string 1, 2, 3, this 1, 2, 3 here is actually a string now. I'll prove it to you. Let's define a variable a, and let's go console log type a. And let's get rid of this console log. Type of a. So what it's actually done is it's taken a number and it's coerced it explicitly into a string. And we've just proven that now. And it's the same with true. It's exactly the same here. Let b equals string console log type of b. So you can see we had a Boolean which we now converted to a string. We've seen strings, now let's look at Booleans. Remember, this is another type of coercion. There are only 3. We looked at strings, now we're looking at Booleans. Booleans cause trouble for many experienced developers. But don't be intimidated by it, because once you understand it, again, it's not that difficult. If you're using loop checks, you'll often need a Boolean. All the value will have to be coerced to a Boolean. recall that there are only two possible results for a Boolean coercion, true or false. Let's hop over to the machine and have a look at an example. Let's now look at Booleans. Again, let's start with implicit coercion when it comes to Booleans. And this is relatively straightforward. We can just console log 1 is greater than 2. And you can see it's automatically coerced that into a Boolean. Yeah, it's false. What about if we did console log 4 equals 4? What do you think that'll be? Well, that's automatically coerced it to true. So you can see here the JavaScript engine is implicitly coercing all of these values into Booleans, false or true. And we use this a lot in JavaScript, so it's awesome that you're understanding it. What about explicit? Let's look at an example. Explicit coercion with Booleans. So we had the number function for numbers, we had the string function for strings, and you guessed it, we've got the Boolean function for Booleans. And let me just say this, I think the easiest way to understand Booleans is to get a grasp as to what's falsy values, because everything else that's not falsy will evaluate to true. So here are the falsy values on the screen at the moment. Okay, so that's simple. Anything else will evaluate to true, except for those falsy values. So let's give an example here. So if we type let a equals boolean 4 and we console log a, we're going to get true. 4 was not one of those falsy values. If we use one of those falsy values, if we use 0 for example, it's going to come out at false. And it's the same with null and undefined. Null is false. Undefined is false. These are all types of explicit Boolean values. How cool is that? And now we're finally on to the third type, numbers. For an explicit conversion, just apply the number function. We've seen this, we've done this many times before. And what about implicit coercion when it comes to numbers? Well, that unfortunately is a little bit more tricky. Why? Because it can be triggered in many cases. Implicit coercion can happen with comparison operators, the unary operator, which we've already seen, bitwise operators, math operators. Sure, there's a lot. But don't be intimidated. We're going to be going through all of these through the course, and you'll start feeling comfortable. Most of them are very, very intuitive. Let's have another look at an example. And now we're on to numbers. Okay, what's an example of an implicit coercion when it comes to numbers? Let me give you an example. Let a equals 4 greater than 3. So I've used a string. What do you think is going to happen? When I console log a, we get the answer true. So what JavaScript has done is it's implicitly coerced that string into a number. And we've already seen examples of explicit coercion when it comes to numbers. Let b equals 1, 2, 3. And we can console.log number b. And this now is a number. It's coerced that into a number. I hope this is starting to make sense. Well done. And we've already covered the 3 types of coercion, to string, to boolean, to number. But it wouldn't be quite complete if I just didn't mention equality, because some operations cannot be run on values of different types. So behind the scenes, JavaScript runs coercion to make our lives easier. We know this. This is what happens. This is implicit coercion. This is where the equality comes into it, those equality signs. Whenever we compare two values using double equal sign, JavaScript will use coercion. But what about if you don't want JavaScript to coerce? What about if you actually want to check types between two values? Well, then you can use what's known as strict equality, and that's using 3 equal signs. Hey, you're probably getting sick of this lecture. I'm sorry. One more quick thing. On equality, I'll just show you the difference between double equal sign and triple equality. Let's say A equals 40 And let's say b equals 40. One's a string, one's a number. We know that. What happens when we console log a equals b? Well, it equals true. But do you know why? It's because JavaScript has coerced that 40 string into a number. But what happens when we put 3 equal signs here? We're going to tell JavaScript not to coerce. As soon as we do that, it says that they're not equal. And we know that's right because this is a string and a is a number. And that's equality for you. Let's get going.